he goes, if you shoot him, I'm going to you. And he goes, why are you protecting this Poindexter ass nigga right here? Again, sir, I'm right here. I can hear you. Ouch. Like, first you're going to shoot me. Now you're just insulting me. This is fucked up. Like, this is Uncle Roger emotional damage. Like, what the did I do? Like, I'm catching strays over here, bro. Like, I'm just trying to go to school, and now I'm getting roasted by someone who's about to shoot me. At this point, either fucking shoot me or roast me. Don't do both. Like, this is fucked up. Beautiful people, welcome in. Take a seat, get comfortable, and stay a while. This is the third episode of the Homie Love Hour with me, your host, Joe Buck. Now we're going to get right into it. Today, just like pretty much every day moving forward, today's sponsors are High Altitude Comedy and Rite of Passage Oats. High Altitude Comedy is my friends Timmy, Nick, and of course myself. We do stand-up comedy all around Summit County, Chaffee County, Routt County, pretty much anywhere that'll book us. Very fortunate. What started off as just something that we did on the side now allows us to make a little bit of extra money. So by the time this airs, we will have Freight in Leadville will be March 8th. And then after that, March 31st, we'll be back at the Pad in Silverthorne hosting a free open mic. So if you want to come tell jokes, do some spoken word poems, interpretive dance, whatever you want to do, March 31st, Pad in Silverthorne, 7 to 9. Come out and have fun with us. Then Rite of Passage Oats is, of course, a vegan and gluten-free overnight oats company owned by me. I started off as just a passion project, something I was doing to save money, but I'm fortunate enough that it's turned into something much bigger, and I now am able to sponsor people. I get to, of course, feed people, and I'm working on sponsoring some more athletes soon enough. So if you have any questions, or you're just interested in learning more about it, it's riteofpassageoats.com. It's RITE, not the direction right. So just like I want you all to tell me about your weeks, I'll tell you about mine. From the last episode to this one, I, of course, was a part of Spontaneous Combustion. I did the Gold Rush. And after that, I took a couple days just to relax, catch up on sleep. Then I went right back into classwork. And then Valentine's Day rolled around. And truthfully, a part of me really felt bad that I couldn't spend it with my girlfriend. But between my job, her job, and the weather, it just didn't really work out that way. So instead of being able to spend it together, she did stuff with her roommates and I did stuff with my friends. Just we cooked dinner, we hung out, we talked, and some of these friends are the same people who got me my MC spot in TEDx. So I was very, very appreciative to be able to spend time with them for the first time in a long time. Now, in the past, I've kind of sequestered myself from a lot of other people, when it comes to Valentine's Day, simply because in the past I felt as though I was inadequate because I didn't have a significant other to share the day with. Now, Valentine's Day, just like every other holiday, is a made-up day. Someone decided this is going to be the day that we celebrate this thing, and that's just going to be that. But that strange societal pressure that I felt oftentimes caused me to have a certain level of frustration and anger with everyone and everything around me because I didn't know how to address it. Now, as you know, growing up as a black boy, you know, you're told like real men don't cry. You know, real men, you know, you just work through it. But that is something that I want to unlearn, and then I push for every man, not just black, but every man to unlearn, because it is so detrimental to your health, like your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, to hold all of that in. Like every day we hear about someone who has some sort of emotional outburst, or, you know, goes on a shooting spree or something along those lines. But I guarantee you, if they had just gone to therapy or talked about it, a lot of that could have been addressed. Now, I've thought about this for a long time, and I have no problem admitting it. Like, I've gone to therapy for off and on for most of my life. And that was also something that I never felt comfortable telling people, because I was so embarrassed about the idea of people knowing that I had something, you know, quote unquote, wrong with me. But as I've gotten older, I don't feel that same desire to please strangers. And I push for anybody to go to therapy, talk about your feelings, because you don't really always know what you're carrying around. Now, I'm not saying just approach a person and trauma dump on them. No. Like, if you're having a bad day and you have people in your life that you trust to talk with about these things, talk through your feelings. Now, I'm not saying just dump it all on someone and then go about your day, because that's unfair to them. But to sit down with someone who, either someone or a group of people whom you trust, and just talk through your feelings, talk through the negatives, talk through the positives. I promise you, more than likely, you're going to come away feeling like a better person. Now, I've done this in the past, and after revisiting it, I realized I hated being vulnerable, which is also something that I had to unlearn. Like, just walking around thinking I had to be this big tough guy all the time was just as negative as just internalizing everything. Because you can't be so strong that you ignore everything. You can't ignore the pain forever. At a certain point, it's going to catch up to you. And, like, going to therapy was very beneficial for me. And on top of going to therapy, I started to make better, healthy life choices. And this past Saturday, I was very fortunate to be a part of TEDx Breckenridge. Now, I've talked about the organization, and I've talked about, you know, the talks, but nothing will prepare you for something that enlightening and that heavy, like being there in person. Like, the second person to go is a local guy named Drew Peterson, and he talked for 18 minutes about his struggles with mental health and how it started, and how through everything he went through, he was too afraid to ask for help, and it led to him almost taking his own life. Now, to talk about mental health issues is one thing, but it's another thing to get up in a room full of 500 people and openly discuss just how detrimental that was to his life and how close he was to never giving this talk because he almost took his own life. I was behind the curtain, and every person back there was crying. Just not like, I just lost my dog crying, but just realizing just how close we've all been to that to that decision to take our own lives really brought it home and really brought into perspective how a person who's always smiling and laughing could very well be the person who does it. And the speaker went on to discuss how he decided to make a movie about it and go into it at length, talking about his struggles with mental health. And through it all, he still chose to ignore it. And then he finally got the help that he needed. And it changed his life. To be able to share a stage with someone. And all I did was introduce people and, make small talk in between on the stage. But to simply share a stage with someone with that powerful of a message was enough to make me want to change my life for the better. Now, there were 11 other speakers. There were 12 people total. And at the end of it, I got to hug or handshake or fist bump majority of those people, if not all of them. And, I thanked as many of them as I could for having that talk. It wasn't just about mental health. It was everything from, who we are as human beings, how we've evolved. We had, I think, 2 middle schoolers and a high schooler. And these young ladies absolutely crushed everything that they did. And it was truthfully, it was beautiful. And I was really fortunate enough to be in that position because of a random act of kindness from 3 of my friends who all happened to be volunteers for the organization, who recommended me to be an MC. Now, I've never MC'd a single thing in my life. I honestly, before doing comedy, I hated the idea of public speaking. I despised the idea of being in front of a crowd of people talking. I would have rather been a wallflower in the back in the dark, just standing there, than to ever have been anywhere near the spotlight. But going back to what I discussed in the previous episode, I told myself I wanted to be better. I wanted to do these things. I wanted to public speak. I wanted to push myself. And the only way to push yourself sometimes is to stumble. And let me tell you, I did a lot of stumbling that night. Being backstage, there's a massive curtain between you and the crowd. You got a paper in your hand and you're like, I got this. You're memorizing everything. And the second they say MC2 is walking out and they open that curtain, it was like when that curtain opened, my brain just got wiped right behind it. So walking out and onto this stage, there's a big red circle carpet where you stand and you present. every time. I I was like, this is the time where I'm gonna pass out on stage. This is the time where something embarrassing is gonna happen, and I'm just gonna fall off the stage. I don't know. I'm gonna piss myself. I don't know. Something's gonna happen. But I was fortunate to have friends in the crowd where every time I walked out, they cheered, and it became an ongoing thing where when I walked out, the crowd would turn to them and wait for them to cheer. And then they would cheer. And while it was friends supporting me, that random act of kindness gave me the level of confidence that I didn't think that I ever possessed. We even did a segment where one of the other MCs teaches a class on ecstatic dancing, where it's all sober. Kat, she'll be on the show at some point to talk about it herself. First Monday of every month at the pad. She's got the first Monday, I've got the last Monday of every month at the pad. If you're ever in Silverthorne, first Monday of the month, come out and support her. But either way, talking about ecstatic dancing, we decided, well, she decided, I simply threw out some ideas to really bolster the theme. So we talked about it, and she was like, I like that idea, let's do it. So we started with the eyes closed, very small movements, and then as the music intensified, people got more and more into it. And your eyes are supposed to be closed, and even on stage with my eyes closed, I didn't budge. I just stood there with my arms crossed, holding my paper, because even in that moment with my eyes closed, I felt too much pressure to cut loose and to enjoy the music and to enjoy the moment. Then I decided to open my eyes, and I see some of the crowd is moving, some of the crowd isn't, and then the music starts to intensify even more. And more of the crowd is moving, and people are really getting into it. And then my co-MC turns and looks at me, and she goes, come on, Joe, now you can't say no. Now, I have never danced in front of anybody, but now I'm being pressured to dance in front of 500 people. And I'm like, nah. But in the midst of saying no, again, having people enjoying themselves and having people cheering and having people cut loose, I decided, why can I not be one of those people enjoying themselves and cutting loose? Doesn't matter whether I'm on the stage, in the crowd. Hell, I could have been in the bathroom. But I deserve and owe it to myself to be able to enjoy who I am and be able to enjoy myself just like everybody else here. So for the first time ever, I did a little shoulder shimmy, a little nothing special. But I did it, and I pushed myself to do it. Now, yet again, that random act of kindness from my co-MC and from the crowd, that support pushed me to do something that I have never done in my 30 plus years on this earth. And I came away from it feeling like a better person. Like I felt slightly alleviated, slightly embarrassed. But in a room full of people doing embarrassing things, what's one more? Absolutely nothing. Now, And the TED Talks were all over. We went out to thank everybody, and I remember my card just said, "Drive home the idea of metamorphosis." I don't remember exactly what I said, but whatever it was, apparently it was impactful enough for people to clap and to cheer. And I don't think that I'm a very prolific person. I don't go out to say the most astonishing things on the planet. But I was able to touch upon the topic of the night and to also encourage people to really look at themselves and decide how they wanted to go through their own metamorphosis to better themselves, give themselves a better quality of life. Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's just figurative. But are we willing to do it? And if so, what do we do? And how do we do it? And afterwards, some of the speakers came up to thank me and to thank, my co-MCs, Kat and Dave. They absolutely carried me. So, to Kat and Dave, thank you all. To Jill, Kaylin, Mary, Kia, the coaches in the back, the speakers that took the time to, thank me or to encourage me. Like, I couldn't have done anything that I did that day without you all. So, I happened to be looking at my calendar and I saw that yesterday was Random Acts of Kindness Day. Now, I'm convinced, just like Valentine's Day and everything else, people just make shit up and just submit it, and someone's like, all right, cool, yeah, that's your day. But I thought heavily on the idea of random acts of kindness and how they've gotten me to this point. Now, I've talked about, my time in Orlando, my time, moving to Alaska, my time in Vail. But after I left Vail, I went back to Alaska. And some of my friends came, some didn't come. Pause. But it was a step in the right direction as far as my life. I was now going back as a manager for a restaurant and just doing things differently. Like, I knew what I wanted to do when I got there. And life had other plans for me. I don't think it was even 2 or 3 weeks into working at the resort that I was working at. And I got into it with the executive chef. Now, this is my boss's boss's boss. Like, this guy makes all of the decisions for the entire resort. And I had heard about him, and I had avoided contact with him for that very reason. But one day we got into it, and words were exchanged, and he showed his true colors. And I reacted exactly how I think he wanted me to react, which was to make me look as bad as possible. But I made myself look worse because I fed into his nonsense and his negativity, and it turned into a whole big thing. And I ended up putting in my notice the next day for the resort. And they asked me, was I leaving because of him? And I was like, absolutely I am. They were like, well, if we get rid of him, will you stay? Now, think about that. I am, at best, middle management cook. And this resort is asking me if getting rid of their head guy will be enough to get me to stay. And I said no. I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go, but I knew I did not want to work for an organization that put people like him in a position of power. And I went to the only bar in town, and at that point I'd sort of become friends with the bartender. And I was talking to him about what happened, and he was like, I'll be right back. And he came back with the owners and introduced us and had me sit down and talk to them. Now, that random act of kindness saved me from having to leave Alaska with my tail tucked between my legs. Because that was my plan. I was like, I don't have anywhere to go. I have to get out of employee housing. I guess I got to go back to Florida. I had no money. I had spent the last of my money getting to Alaska. So the idea of calling my family to say, hey, I just got fired, or hey, I just quit my job, was not something that I wanted to do. And his random act of kindness got me a job, my own cabin, and I was now working at the only bar in town, so I got to see my friends and my roommates more than I did when we were living together and as neighbors. Now, I've always prided myself on my work ethic and my ability to carry myself in a very professional manner. So I took over running the breakfast for the bed and breakfast that was there. So I would have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go into work at 4, cook until 5, and then I would have to walk the food, physically carry this food from one building through to another building to go set up the breakfast. I had to make the orange juice. I had to do all that stuff myself. And I remember one morning I met this lady and she's just staring at me. And I know you're thinking, another old white lady staring at me, not gonna go well, clearly. But I could tell immediately it was something different. So she comes up to me, she's an old British lady, very, very sweet. And she begins to ask me, about myself, where am I from, blah, blah, blah. And out of nowhere, she proceeds to tell me how I look just like a man that she fell in love with 50 years ago. And she never knew what happened to him. And she asked me if I was his son. Now, it's a pretty ridiculous question to ask a stranger. But all I could do, I was just like, I'm sorry, like, I'm not even Hawaiian. Like, I've never been to Hawaii. Like, it's not my people. I don't know what to tell you. And she kind of just stands there for a second, and she starts to get teary-eyed. And while she's fighting back tears, she says, that man was the only man that I ever loved in my life. Is it okay if I hug you? And I said, okay. And she hugged me, and she is like weeping, like, into my shoulder. And all I could do is just pat her on the back, and I'm like, hey, it's okay. And I'm like rubbing her back and patting her and consoling her. And it was like on cue. As soon as she stopped crying, this old guy comes around the corner, and he just sees his wife crying and me standing there. And immediately he's like, honey, are you okay? Are you alright? And he's consoling her. And she's like, I'm fine. And I'm so confused because I'm like, I don't know what just happened. And a little while later, she comes back. And she tells me, she's like, don't ever let someone else decide your life for you. And she was like, I did it when I was your age, and I lost the man that I loved most. And I was like, that's heavy. That's crazy to drop that on me and then just walk away. Like, that's wild. And I truly thought about that. And to this day, I still think about it almost 10 years later. The idea of giving up something or someone or making a decision because of a ripple effect that changed your life forever. And for that lady, it was choosing to marry a man that her family approved of because the man that she loved, she knew she would never get that same approval. So I began to think back on every time over the course of my life where I allowed outside pressure to get me to do something differently that I wouldn't have normally done. Whether it was getting involved with people that I knew that I shouldn't have, or, stealing stuff, fighting, things that for a lot of us are just a part of our youth. It is what it is. But I thought back to one moment in particular where a random act of kindness saved my life. And even now, it's truly crazy to think about. Like, this particular situation caused me to lose a lot of sleep. I had to go to therapy behind this. Like, I couldn't be in public, like, in big groups of people. I couldn't be around people that I didn't know. Like, it just was what it was. But I'm fortunate enough to be here to tell this story because of a random act of kindness. So, like I said, like, I was very fortunate. Like, I grew up in the hood. Like, are there worse places in the world? Absolutely. But where I grew up really wasn't great. But I was fortunate because my parents always stressed the importance of education and made sure that my siblings and I always recognized the advantages that we had and that we always helped the people around us. So we never people knew us because of our dad. Like, my dad did a lot over the course of his life. He is the quintessential, I guess normally you would say rag to riches, but for him his riches were in us. Like, he sacrificed a lot over the course of his life to make sure that we had what we wanted, we never went without, but also to make sure that our quality of life, if we wanted to do something, we did it. Not just physical things. If we, like I said in the last episode, when we wanted fireworks, he drove us from Miami to North Carolina to go get fireworks. If we were going to get some food, each of us got to choose where we wanted food. He would go to every single place. If there was a carnival, my dad would stop. Didn't matter, school night, weekend, we were there. Sometimes we go multiple days in a row because it was about the experience. And he made sure that we never forgot just how fortunate we were in comparison to other people. So, I say all that to preface this particular situation. So, I was in what Florida calls like a magnet program. So, pretty much from kindergarten, pre-K, I was in a special writing program, and so were my siblings. So we were in this program, and we were kept segregated from the rest of the school. So these are, we're in school across the street from our house. So we see our friends, we see our neighbors in school, but because they weren't in the program, we weren't allowed to interact with them. We went to breakfast at different times. We went to lunch at different times. We were in a segregated section of the school. Like, we were just told we were better and different. So we were just kept away from our friends. But when I got to middle school, I was still in this program. But at that point, we were segregated less, and there were times where there was overlap between us. And I remember there was this guy. I say guy because I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, and this dude was 16, still in 6th or 7th grade. Maybe 8th? I really have no idea. But he was so bad that he had gotten kicked out of his class. So they gave him a book, like a textbook, and a packet of assignments, and he had to come sit in our class to do his work in there. Now, he was very clearly struggling, but he was like a very, very gifted football player. But he couldn't play for the school because he was too old. So he played for like an Optimist team. But I remember one day he was struggling with this one particular thing. And I decided to help him with this thing. And that one thing turned into every day I would finish my work and then I would go help him with his work. And I wouldn't say that we were friends, but our relationship became symbiotic, where I would finish my work, I would help him with his work, and he would in turn keep people from fucking with me too much. Because at that time, I was weird. I was a nerd. Like, I'm still a nerd now, but before you really come into your own, you don't know who you are as a person. So it's those weird formative years. So he looked out for me, like when we were in school. And then I remember when I went to high school, I saw him like once or twice, and then I didn't see him anymore after that. Then my senior year of high school, I got put out of that particular high school. I was no longer in the writing program. It ended, my ninth grade year, and I I was acting out a lot. I didn't really care about school. I was in all honors and AP classes, but I just didn't care. Like I was purposely skipping school, going to the arcades, going to the movies, just really acting out because I was hurting and I was dealing with a lot of pain, but I didn't know how to address it and I wasn't ready to do that. So I just acted out. So I got put out of the school that I was going to, right by my house too. Maybe like a mile, 2 miles from my house, so I could walk home from school. I could still do whatever I wanted. And I got put out for fighting. So the school that I got sent to, I had to catch 3 or 4 buses to get there. And also had to be up like an hour and a half earlier. And either I had to walk to the bus stop or I would get dropped off at the bus stop. But I remember my sister was supposed to drop me off and she overslept. So I missed the bus that I was supposed to be on, but she dropped me off at a closer bus stop. And I remember I'm sitting there at this bus stop, and the new school I went to, I had to wear a uniform. So I'm wearing this doofy ass white polo shirt and like either khaki shorts or blue shorts. The school's colors were like white, gold, and blue. So I remember I'm sitting at this bus stop, and the sun isn't even up yet. This is right after Christmas. So for the uneducated or the uninitiated, pretty much from Christmas to probably April, that is prime robbing season for a lot of people. Because Christmas, you get whatever you want majority of the time. And then right after Christmas is tax return season. So if you're caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, shit, you could be at the right place at the wrong time. Your pockets are getting run. So I remember I'm sitting at this bus stop and I see 2 guys walking towards me. Now, the bus stop that I'm at is on a major street. So it's like 3 or 4 lanes going east and west, and there's a big median in the middle of the road. So I'm sitting at this bus stop and I'm waiting, and I get this uncomfortable feeling. And I'm looking at these guys walking towards me, and that feeling is intensifying. And I've always been told, if you have that feeling, don't ignore it, because usually there's something there. So as they're walking towards me, that feeling is becoming palpable. I'm starting to feel sick as these guys are walking towards me. So I move where I was sitting. So I move away from the bus stop and I move to another spot. And then I look back at them and I realize they've turned directions and they're now walking straight at me again. So I move to another spot and they start walking towards me again. So this whole time I'm moving, and every time they're just changing to match me perfectly. And I got the bright idea in my head. I'm like, I'm going to go stand in the median in the middle of the street. Nobody is going to follow me into the median because you got to walk across 3 lanes of traffic. I was wrong, because they walked into the street and they started walking towards me while I was standing on that median. And in a brief moment, as they got close enough, it felt like time slowed down just in that moment. And I turned, and who do I see but the very same guy that I used to tutor. Now, in between middle school and high school, I said I had only seen him a handful of times. His sister had moved in 3 houses down from me, and she was renting that house. So I would see him over at her house. And she was a very nice lady, single mother, so I would help her by cutting her grass. Again, a random act of kindness. And you'll see how that ties into this story. As I turn in slow motion and I make contact with the side of his face, I go, "Chris." No response. I go, "Chris." And he goes, "No response. No response." And I got mad now because I'm like, "You're actively ignoring me." And I go, "Nigga, I know you hear me." And he turns and kind of looks at me out the corner of his eye. And he lets out this breath that I didn't even realize he was holding. I don't know if he realized he was holding it. And he goes, "Man, I'm so glad you said something." And I'm like, "Bro, what the fuck? Like, why were you ignoring me? Like, I was calling your name." And he goes, "Dog, I was about to shoot you." And I'm like, "What? Like, why the fuck are you gonna shoot me?" And he goes, "Bro, you're too big to rob." He was like, "It's easier just to shoot you and run your pockets." Now, my first thought is, I'm a reasonable person, you know? Like, if you would have just told me, "Hey, I have a gun," I would have just given you my wallet. Like, if you would have just walked up, like, barehanded, like, hands out and said, like, "Run me your pockets," we would have squabbled, absolutely. But it's Miami in January. It's fucking hot all the time. So the fact that you are wearing a hoodie and the sun isn't even up yet, that's all the reason that I need to believe you. If you say, "Hey, bro, I got a gun. Here you go, sir." Like, my life is worth more than whatever's in that wallet. I'm in high school. I'm fucking poor. And while all this is going on, his boy is still standing about 3 feet, 4 feet back. And he's looking around, hands still in his pockets. And I'm uncomfortable. I'm starting to realize this uneasy feeling that I had was more coming from this other guy than from the guy who was about to shoot me. And I'm like, "Yo, what's up with your boy?" And he's like, "Oh, don't worry about him." And I'm like, "Well, I'm kind of worried because he's acting real weird." And he goes, "Hey, man, get his shit." And he's like, nah, he's cool. He was like, "Nah, he's not. Get his shit." And he's like, "Nah." And he pulls out a gun. And he goes, "Nigga, if you don't take his shit, I'ma take his shit." And again, I'm like, "Bro, I'm reasonable. You can still take my wallet. Why do you have to add the gun into the equation? If one of the two of you has a gun. That is enough for me. Both of you don't need to shoot me. Like, it's overkill. No pun intended. And now I'm mad because I'm like, bro, like, what the fuck? Like, I don't even know you, but Chris, you? Like, come on, bro. Like, I thought we was cool. And immediately, just like we were back in middle school, Chris jumps to my defense. And he goes, nah, he's cool. Let him keep his shit. And the guy cocks the hammer. And Chris cocks his hammer. And he goes, if you shoot him, I'm going to kill you. And he goes, why are you protecting this Poindexter ass nigga right here? Again, sir, I'm right here. I can hear you. Ouch. Like, first you're going to shoot me. Now you're just insulting me. This is fucked up. Like, this is Uncle Roger emotional damage. Like, what the fuck did I do? Like, I'm catching strays over here, bro. Like, I'm just trying to go to school, and now I'm getting roasted by someone who's about to shoot me. At this point, either fucking shoot me or roast me. Don't do both. Like, this is fucked up. And Chris goes, you don't understand. He goes, without this man, I would have never gotten out of middle school. And he goes, on top of that, he cuts my sister's grass. And if something happens to him, I'm going to have to cut her grass. Yet again. Fuck middle school. Fuck the fact that I'm reasonable. Your main motivation for not shooting me is the fact that I cut your sister's grass. And if something happens to me, you're going to have to do it. So the idea that manual labor in the Miami Heat is a larger deciding factor than going to prison for the rest of your life for this man is diabolical work. And I'm like, fuck. Like, it's like a Mexican standoff. Everyone has a gun except me, and they're pointing them. Luckily at that point, no one had pointed them yet, but both of the hammers were cocked. And I'm just like, well, what do I do? And the dude eventually puts the gun back in his pocket. And I'm like, so Chris. And he turns and immediately points the gun right at me. And I realize it's a .38 snub nose. And it's wrapped in black electric tape. And I'm like, bro, are you really going to shoot me? First I asked if the gun was real. And then I thought to the whole hammer, you hear the click. And he was like, yeah, I was. But I decided I'm not going to. And instead he goes, as he has a gun in my face, I'm trying to, of course, move away from it. He goes, you want to hold it? And turns the gun around to hand it to me. I'm mind blown. We were just in a tense standoff that could have ended with all three of us dead. And now you're just asking me if I wanted to hold the very weapon that you were going to take my life with. And I'm like, bro, what the fuck? And he's like, yeah, you're right. You don't want your handprints on here. And I'm like, I'm not thinking about fingerprints. I'm thinking about the fact that you almost just shot me. And he goes, bro, you're good. Don't worry about it. And I asked him, why are you out here at this time? And I remember he said to me, shit, it's Robin season. I'm trying to get my numbers up. Again, I was a massive nerd at that time. My brain immediately went to women. And my response was, bro, whose numbers are you going to get? All the girls are still sleeping. And he laughs at me. And he goes, bro, don't ever change. And I remember he put his hood back up. And him and the other guy walked into the darkness. And I went back to the bus stop and I went to school. That idea alone is pretty wild. Just to be like, oh yeah, I almost died today. Now I gotta go study macroeconomics in fucking 6th period. I gotta go to home ec, for 3rd period. Like, man, I don't give a fuck about that shit no more. But it seemed almost too surreal to have actually happened. And then I sort of forgot about it. I did, but I didn't. And then one day, a couple weeks later, I'm walking home, and Chris's sister comes out. And she's got tears in her eyes. And she proceeds to tell me how Chris got killed just a few days ago. In my head, I'm like, that can't be, So as I'm sitting there in her driveway, trying to process what she's saying to me, she hugs me. Not too dissimilar from how that old lady hugged me all those years later. And she cried into my shoulder. And she told me how, even after everything, Chris talked to her all the time about how I was the only person in middle school who cared about his education. And I was the only person who ever took the time to help him learn. And I remember she pulled out a Nike shoebox. And she said, I want you to take something of Chris's to remember him by. How could I say no to that? So she opens the box, and I feel as though I just won the world's most fucked up game show, and now I get to collect my prize. And as I'm sitting there looking at the boxes, looking at the box and looking at the stuff inside, I see this Crown Royal bag. I'm like, oh, maybe there's something cool in there, like a rock collection or something, or maybe there's some money. And I don't even pull the bag out of the box. I just open it a little bit. And staring me in the face was that same 38 snub nose that he could have very well have taken my life with. Now, part of me wanted to take it and find the person that killed him and make them feel the same pain that his sister was now feeling. But then I thought about how that wouldn't do anything. That wouldn't solve anything. That would just further perpetuate more pain and violence. And I also felt it was selfish to do that. To inflict pain on someone because I felt pain is dubious. Like, it's wrong to want to do that to someone else. So instead of taking the gun and becoming just another person with a gun, or becoming another statistic or anything else, I took Chris's story with me. And honestly, I feel like it's a lot heavier. It's a bigger burden, you know, to remember a person for both the good and the bad is hard. But it just put into perspective that sometimes good people do bad things all the time. Like, sometimes good people do bad things. We don't always know the rhyme or the reason. I don't really know Chris's rhyme or reason. Maybe he thought that's all there was for him, was robbing and killing. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe at that time he just felt like that was what he was supposed to do. Just like in middle school, how I felt it was what I was supposed to do when I helped him, when I tutored him. Like, I always hoped that didn't happen to Chris. But it did, and I can't undo that. But the idea that a random act of kindness is what saved my life years later, and how his random act of kindness kept my mom from being the one crying. sometimes it's tough, you know? It's like survivor's guilt is a very real thing because you think, well, if I had done this differently, then, this particular thing would have been different. But that's just not how life works. So it bothered me for most of my life. Even now, it still bothers me, but for different reasons. For a long time, I wondered, like, why? Why wasn't it me? Like, why didn't he just pull the trigger? Like, he could have shot me from 3 feet away. He could have shot me from 10 feet away. But he got close enough that I happened to notice him. And that's what saved my life. Not too long after that, I started going to counseling to really work through that whole thing. And for anyone who's seen me do comedy, I've told that joke or that story on stage, but I always end it with a joke. For me, a lot of the jokes that I tell and a lot of the stories that I tell when I'm on stage, I always get asked if they're real or if I just make them up. And I wish I was that creative to make them up because it's all very real. But making a joke about a lot of these situations allows me to, one, to bring light to these situations, and two, to create a world in my head where Chris isn't dead, or where this old lady ended up with the guy that she loved and not just someone that her family approved of. But unfortunately, we live in reality. So I like to do random acts of kindness because I am never fully sure whose life it could positively affect and whose life it could very well end up saving. Like when I first moved to where I live now, I went to the grocery store to get stuff to make spaghetti. And to this day, I feel so bad for the guy who tried to be nice to me. Just some random guy on the spaghetti aisle, said hi. And I'm looking around trying to figure out who he's talking to. And he's looking at me and he's smiling. And I realize the thing that I need is right by his head. Could have been pasta, could have been sauce, whatever. And I remember I walk over and I go to grab it. I'm avoiding looking at this guy. Because I was always taught, like, don't talk to strangers. If you don't know them, you don't need to know them. And this guy goes, "Hey man, how's it going?" And I'm looking around and I look at him. I'm like, "Are you talking to me?" And he goes, yeah. I'm like, why are you talking to me? He goes, well, man, you look like you need a friend. And I responded with, I will fucking kill you. Don't ever fucking talk to me. And I grabbed the pasta or the sauce or whatever it was, and I stormed off the aisle. This poor man was only trying to be nice to a stranger who was struggling on the international aisle because he could barely afford to make spaghetti. And my response probably affected him pretty harsh. But I thought back on it, and I remember I talked to my mom about it. And she was like, well, honey, sometimes people are just nice. And I'm like, well, you're the one who told me not to talk to strangers. Not to talk to strangers. And she's like, yeah, when you were a child. She's like, you're an adult now. You make your own decisions. And that little piece of advice has stuck with me over the years. I'm an adult now. I make my own decisions. I now make it a point to do random acts of kindness. Not because I want anything from it, or because, I think there's some sort of higher power just keeping a tally in their book, but because, one, I don't ever want someone to feel the way I probably made that guy on the spaghetti aisle feel. And two, because I know just how important it is to find a reason to smile when you think there isn't one. And I appreciate every person who's ever given me a reason to smile, or gone out of their way to talk to me, or just been nice to me. Like, I can't remember every single person, and I'm sure as I get older, the faces will fade. But just like I said in the previous episode, the experience and that feeling that came from that moment is what will stick with me. So if I can give that feeling to one other person, then why not? Nothing is stopping me from being a nicer person. Nothing is stopping me from being more kind, or being more loving, or accepting, or generous. Except myself and any sort of influence I allow to dictate how I live my life. Now, after Chris passed, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. After Chris was murdered, I was angry. And I refused to be kind. I refused to be helpful. I refused to care about other people. And all that did was stop the light that I have in my life from shining on other people. Now I think about all of the times I could have made someone's life better, but it just didn't bother to because I was too busy hurting. I was too busy grieving my own way for this dude who I barely knew. But this dude who I barely knew who had such an impact on my life sporadically over the most formative years of my life. I think this is a good spot to end the episode. This is not a challenge. This is a call to action. Go do a random act of kindness. I'm not saying go empty your bank account and give that money to a stranger. I'm not saying buy someone's groceries. If you don't have it, you don't have it. 'Cause shit, there's times where I don't have it for myself, let alone for other people. But sometimes an act of kindness is smiling at a stranger. Sometimes it's holding a door for someone. Sometimes it's just asking the homie, "How you doing? Tell me about your day. Here, come take a seat. Talk to me. Get comfortable. Stay a while. You know, let's catch up on things. Let's be there for one another." So, please, take an opportunity. Be that positive change in someone's life. Be the good. Just go do a random act of kindness. Hug someone who you think needs it. I'm not saying just run around and hug strangers because I don't have the money to bail you out of jail. But I feel as though a lot of the times we know when someone needs it. So if you feel as though someone needs it, ask them about their day. Give them a hug with consent. Just give them a fist bump. Give them a smile. Let them know that they matter. If you don't have the energy or the space in your life to allow them to be there, just let them know that you care. And when you have that space and that energy, you'll be there for them. And see how quickly that person potentially changes. You know, I was talking to someone the other day about changing the world. And he says, "Well, I can't change the world." And I said, "Yes, you can. Because your world is everything that you come in contact with. The people, your family, your friends, your coworkers, all of those people are in your world. So that little bit of positivity, that little bit of random act of kindness can have such a large effect where your world, the people around you, want to be better. Maybe it'll make you want to be better. And that's how it starts. You're never going to change the globe. You're not going to change the country at any given time. But you can change those you directly have an impact on. Those you come in contact with every day. Those people are your world. And you have the ability to let them in or to just do something kind for them and go about it. Go about your day. You might see them again. You might never see them again. but you have that power. And that's something that nobody can ever take away from you. So for this episode of the Homie Love Hour, I've been Joe Buck. I'll see you all around. Be good to yourself. Be good to your world. And just remember, I love you, homie.